welcome to Global Review. I am Sachin Chaturvedi. We bring to you every week detailed analysis of what has happened. This week particularly was extremely satisfying when International Monetary Fund released its annual estimations, and the projection is very clear in terms of how India stands. The fact that they have placed India's growth rate at 7.7% is quite encouraging. It has been reduced for many other countries. The world growth rate has been estimated to be same as it was last year, largely because of the trade conflicts which we have been discussing in this show. But as always, let's first have a look at the headlines. India will continue to buy Iranian oil despite US sanctions on Iran. Zambia's debt to China increases. South Africa ends up on the door of International Monetary Fund. New tax rules for Cuba's private sector aim to boost transparency. Chile and EU to collaborate more in the areas of technologies, particularly in the mining sector. Ecuador makes efforts for rising revenue, ends up with $1.6 billion deal with private companies for oil fields. Italy and France move ahead with cooperation in areas that are related to EU elections. Pro-Russian party wins elections in Latvia. Iran agreed to establish a joint bank with Iraq for the ease of trade under the regulations of central banks. In this episode, we have thought of covering the issues that are extremely important in the Latin American region. We call this Across the Globe. Brazil has gone through a major election analysis that is requiring detailed discussion in terms of what the trends are, what kind of election outcomes we can expect and what is actually already on the table. Brazil's future has been in doldrums for last more than a year. And if you go by the scandals that were there which led to this fall of the government, I think the issues are extremely complicated. Let's have a look at this report.
On October 7, 2018, Brazil held general elections to elect its president, vice president and National Congress. The fight for presidency was primarily between the right-wing conservative candidate Jair Bolsonaro of the Social Liberal Party and Fernando Haddad representing the Workers' Party. Bolsonaro led the first round with 46% reflecting 49 million votes, followed by Haddad's at 29% with 31 million votes. The remaining votes were captured by candidates from the Democratic Labour Party, Brazilian Social Democracy Party and New Party amongst others. Bolsonaro's Social Liberal Party has also become the second largest party, rising to 52 seats from 8 seats in the lower house and is right behind Haddad's Workers' Party, which holds 56 seats. The second round of elections, which will take place on October 28, 2018, is becoming known as the election of rejection due to high anti-Workers' Party sentiment affected by the corruption investigation known as Operation Car Wash. Since 2003, Brazil's government have been left-leaning, initially led by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who governed for 13 years on behalf of the Workers' Party, followed by Dilma Rousseff till 2014. Haddad, who is known as the stand-in for former President Lula, is facing the challenge of null ballot as the electorate favorable to the Workers' Party is abstaining to vote in large numbers. Taking a conservative turn, Brazil's first round of elections reflect a need for change given economic recession with high unemployment, corruption scandals and increasing crime with 64,000 homicides in 2017. Bolsonaro pledges to fight crime, corruption and jumpstart the economy with a focus on the underdeveloped Amazon region. Vote mapping reflects the most of Northwest, West and South Brazil supported the candidacy of Bolsonaro and Northeast Brazil supported the Workers' Party.
India-Brazil started very close partnership in WTO. With Lula's leadership, the whole idea of India-Brazil-South Africa came up and Lula could place Brazil firm on the global map in terms of social equity, justice and many other broad ideals with which Latin American region was known for right in 50s and 60s. We have here a very rich panel to discuss some of the intricate issues in the Latin American region today. We are joined in here by Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, who has been extremely active in this policy debate in this region. He has served Indian missions in Latin America. We are also joined in by Professor Sreeram Chaulia, who is an excellent commentator and discussant on this program. So Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, let me start this with you first. After Lula and Dilma, how you see this new choice coming up? What kind of stability now you expect in Brazil?
It's going to be interesting to see because it looks like Bolsonaro has the edge. Not just an edge, he has a distinct advantage, although we'll have to see after the 28th of October who wins. It's also clear that there's a right-wing shift by the population of Brazil, which is fed up of corruption, mismanagement, law and order, crime, other issues. And it seems that most parties are tainted. If you see the results of the elections, even the current president, Michel Temer, his party has fared fourth in the congressional elections. The PT has done badly. They've lost the governorship of Minas Gerais, which is their base. Their former president, Mrs. Dilma Rousseff, who was mentioned in your report, has also lost her own Senate seat. She was allowed to contest after being impeached. So this is serious for the PT. It means they've lost a huge amount of their base. At the same time, Bolsonaro, if you multiply the factor of 60% of voting by the electorate by his 46%, you're getting a less than 30% positive vote in his favor. Now, what I understand from the latest reports I've read is that the entire left is coalescing around Haddad, who is the heir apparent of Lula. And I'm not sure if that will tilt the balance. The centrist candidate Ciro Gomes of the PDT has also backed, conditionally, Fernando Haddad. So I think this is more or less a polarization for the presidential election that has taken place.
Yeah.
But clearly there seems to be a right-wing tilt.
With this right-wing tilt, what kind of policy changes, Ambassador Bhojwani, you see here coming up? What kind of connect for India?
It's very difficult to say because Mr. Bolsonaro is an unknown entity. He's been in politics for a long time. He's won 7 elections and out of 162 bills that he presented to Congress when he was there, only 2 have passed. So it's not clear whether his policies as enunciated by him as a candidate will find favor in a Congress where there are 30 parties participating. His party doesn't even have the majority of seats, nor I think do his allies. So we'll have to see what he can pass. But clearly in terms of executive action, there'll be a tightening up. There's talk, there are reports that he might have military men in his government. There is talk that he will allow more possession of guns and weapons and things like that. Overall, a certain hardening of social and political policies. On the economic front, the Real has done pretty well after the first round of elections. The Bolsa, the Bovespa, if I'm not mistaken, has gone up significantly.
That's
so
right.
it looks like economically there may be good news.
Sreeram, how you view this in the backdrop of the larger trends that we are seeing coming out from the region? Both in Argentina, the financial crisis has actually deepened further. Last month, IMF gave $50 billion and bailed them out. Uruguay and Paraguay are not far from the crisis. So we see issues precipitating around a major challenge for the region. How you see this election in the larger geopolitical context?
Sachin, the big broad context, of course, is the right-wing populism that, as you know, has swept many parts of Europe and North America. And now it's come to Latin America. I don't think there's ever been a candidate like Bolsonaro who didn't even have a recognized party, who's now almost on the verge of winning the presidency. So riding this, similar slogans based on, law and order, cracking down on corruption, social conservatism, so militarism and all these things. So I think there is that larger context of the established party systems failing. It seems
we saw that failing in United States itself, but
in Europe in countries like Italy and Austria. So the center left, center right, since the restoration of democracy in Brazil is the mid 1980s, we have not seen anything like this.
Any peculiar trend, Sreeram, you see that goes in favor of a larger understanding in terms of people's frustration, the Me Too and corruption and several things which are becoming common for most of the democracies, and you are finding a sort of public reaction through elections?
Yeah, I mean, democracy is supposed to, as the theory goes, to throw out the rascals. But here, as Ambassador Bhojwani is saying, there's no choice left. I mean, people are saying Bolsonaro was the least worst option or the last resort option. So they have now reached almost.
In fact, there were campaigns against him as well in Brazil.
Yeah, but the majority seems to be, so desperate to come out of this that they are willing to hand over power to someone who clearly has, fascistic or undemocratic tendencies. But that is the crisis of democracy you're witnessing. And in Latin America in particular, one thing noticeable is that the perceived levels of corruption have increased a lot throughout the region. So that reflects a crisis of governance that, the cycle, there was an era when Lula was, as you mentioned, toast of the whole world and he was leading a renaissance. Exactly. And now there's a sense of that cycle may have ended along with the commodities super cycle that busted.
And Mr. Bhojwani, on this point, I would very much like to hear from you how you see his commitment for international understandings that his predecessors made, like I gave example of IPSA, BRICS is there. What kind of commitment he may exhibit or sort of dissenting voice on some of these regional and multilateral fora?
You refer to Bolsonaro?
That's right.
It's hard to say. It's very hard to say because I think Donald Trump wasn't really predicted to be as radical in terms of the disruption that he has caused internationally. I think we all agree on that because he's talked about, he's really tried to reconfigure NAFTA, he's walked out of the climate change agreement.
That's right.
He's done all kinds of things. So I don't know, and quite honestly, perhaps it's a lack in my research. I think I haven't seen Bolsonaro talking too much about international relations. I'd like to read more of his personal statements. And his party just had one seat in Congress in 2014. They've got 50 now, 52. Now, that being the case, there's going to be more representation. So perhaps more, and they say the military is going to play a larger role. Clearly, there's going to be a defense angle to his government. Perhaps more strategic decisions will be taken. Will there be a more aggressive move towards, say, Venezuela, where there has been a migration coming in, which has caused a reaction in the region, on the border, and so on. Economically, I think, if I'm not mistaken, traditionally, right-wing and strong governments in Brazil have tended to do rather well by the economy because they promote business.
Absolutely right. On this note, we would have to take a break. Don't go away. Latin America is our focus. We would be back with more details. Welcome back. In this section, we cover news that has gone off the print and we analyze that for you. Today, we cover this in our section called Beyond the News. We take up detailed analysis of what has come in place of NAFTA. With US and Canada fighting over several issues related to market access and subsidies, United States was against the continuation of the format that NAFTA was really in. What has come up in its place? Let's have a look at this report.
The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement USMCA, which comes into effect in January 2020, replaces the North American Free Trade Agreement, that is NAFTA, which came into effect in 1994. USMCA revises NAFTA on automobiles, drugs and dairy, introduces a new chapter for intellectual property rights, inserts a sunset clause but retains Chapter 19 and 20 of NAFTA on dispute resolution. The automobile sector faces maximum revision with the demand to increase production of automobiles in North America, with 75% of the components to be regionally manufactured. Also, 40% of cars manufactured should be made by workers who earn a minimum wage of $16 per hour. This affects Mexico as the new wages are 7 times more than average Mexican manufacturing wages. The labor regulations also influence location preferences of manufacturing companies who tend to set up companies where labor cost is low. This will likely increases the cost of production of cars in North America compared to Asian and European producers. USMCA also removes the production quota of the Canadian dairy industry, which till now protected Canada's dairy sector from the US dairy exports. The new clause gives US dairy producers access to Canada's market. Changes to the pharmaceutical drugs clause also opens Canadian market to US drugs, who will get market access before subjected to generic domestic competition. A new chapter on intellectual property tightens protection of patents and trademarks, and a clause on safety imposes higher regulations on Mexican trucks entering into United States. The retention of the clause on dispute resolution, which was widely pushed for by Canada, allows the members to challenge the anti-dumping and countervailing duties of partner countries. The retained clause is in favor of Mexico and Canada, who collectively oppose the increased US protectionist policies.
So USMCA has come in place of NAFTA. The negotiations were extremely interesting. United States wanted access in dairy products in Canada. Canada was insisting on only one thing, to have the dispute panel in place. Canada was extremely concerned about WTO losing it out, so they wanted NAFTA to have that. And that was the only condition placed by Canada, apart from a couple of sectoral concerns. Mexico was largely quiet, but insisted in terms of having fair market access. The provision for regional production is another major addition to any of the global regional trading arrangements. Probably it is to ward off what all is coming in from China. So you can't re-export what is landing in your territory from some other countries. So 75% is the rule of origin that they have fixed up for local manufacturing in the North American region. So with these kind of conditionalities, Ambassador Bhojwani, how you see USMCA going forward in terms of an effective, deeper regional cooperation?
Hard to say, I must admit, because what I go by is the reaction of the incoming Andrés Manuel López Obrador government. His foreign minister designate, Marcelo Ebrard, went to the press a few days after Donald Trump made the announcement and said that this is an agreement they can live with, that they will protect, that they have protected their interests and so on. They have, of course, had to give something, and this is the famous art of the deal that President Trump has been openly proclaiming. He said, you've got to give me more in order to retain what I've given you. So that seems to be the situation. I am not sure if Mexico had much choice in terms of the negotiations. They must have safeguarded some of the dispute settlement, for instance, because this investor dispute settlement is critical for Mexico. It relies on foreign investment hugely, and particularly not just in the industrial sector, automobiles and so on, but even in the hydrocarbon sector. So I think there was a considerable amount of give and take, which we are perhaps not privy to, and maybe experts will know better about. But I think in terms of what Mexico has managed to retain, it is significant enough for the incoming president, who is extremely left-wing, respected by Donald Trump, who has said that, you know, he can work with him and so on.
Yes,
so
exactly.
that's significant.
Sreeram, this paradoxical description of a restrictive free trade agreement which is protectionist in its approach is a big challenge for some of us who are working in the realm of trade theory and its application. How you as a student of international politics view this? What kind of
I think Sachin, obviously the drive came from Trump and the populism from within the US and the view that the American workers were getting a raw deal.
Yeah.
That was the basis of this whole renegotiation. Now the stakes are high. If you see the NAFTA, the total trade trilateral is $1.2 trillion per annum.
Yeah.
So in a way, the interdependence is so high. You know, volumes are massive. Like US Canada is around 500 billion. US Mexico is the similar thing. Canada Mexico is around 300 billion. So they had to somehow, you know, save it in some form or the other. So it's a relief that, because initially Trump was threatening that I'll go bilateral, I'll completely break up this trilateral thing and simply do one-on-one with each country.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
ultimately, I think there are many lobbies even within the US that prevailed, saying that we have benefits from this, from being part of this.
Yeah.
So if you go sector by sector, I mean, Trump is the type of person who always declares that he has won for rhetorical and for political reasons. But as Ambassador Bhojwani is saying, there was give and take, and there were certain US sectors, even dairy, for example, Canada opened up, but Canadian dairy farmers will also be able to access more US market.
Yeah.
And likewise, you see, so it's hard to really calculate. And if you see the auto industry, as our report was mentioning, if the basic cost of manufacturing of cars in North America goes up, they will become less competitive vis-a-vis the Germans and vis-a-vis the Japanese. So in the long run, are US auto workers benefiting from it or not? That's a question.
And with the fact that they are switching over to electric cars, and China next year would be producing 50% of the global
Geely and these companies are
production of the electric
worldwide
cars. Yeah,
exactly. So you know, in a way, for the three partners in this deal, it may not actually benefit the working class in any of these countries in the long run. To say that we are, you know, working for we have labor conditionalities and environmental conditionalities, and that it is going to improve. Now, Obama had a much bigger plan called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the economists are saying if they had gone with TPP, and there was no need for renegotiating NAFTA, because then Canada and Mexico would have come as part of that as anyway, and then they would have had a greater chance to change the wage structures in countries like Vietnam, which now they cannot. So if you look at it overall, it's a political win for Trump to boast about, but from the national interests of the three countries, the economic interests, I am very doubtful that you know, it's an overall win.
On this note, we would take book of the week. And today we have thought of covering what is called as financial integration in Latin America. Led by Charles Enoch and his team, it talks about a new strategy for a new normal. The book identifies the key barriers that they are facing in the whole Latin American region, be that in the realm of insurance or banking sector, how institutions are not able to come together. And the Latin American region particularly is facing a number of challenges because of the openness that they have ensured within the WTO, but even otherwise in terms of allowing US banks to provide access in the Latin American region. As a result, what happens in New York, it has direct impact on Latin American market. Sreeram, what's your expert view?
Sachin, I read this. The main point they're making is there is under integration in financial terms, in terms of capital movements and in terms of banks of one Latin country to be able to operate in other Latin countries. There are still regulatory barriers and all these things. And as you rightly said, the leverage is more towards the Wall Street and to the US, and they need to free themselves from it in order to improve the infrastructure.
What's your quick reaction on financial integration in Latin American region?
I think it's a contradiction in terms. There's very little financial integration, not because of the currency fluctuations, which are massive, and the deficits most of the governments are running, but also because if you see, China has lent more in the past few years to all over the region than the World Bank, the IADB and others combined. So clearly there's something that's lacking.
Excellent. So do read Dr. Enoch's book. You are seeing my Twitter handle on your screens. Do send us your comments. We close for now. Thanks for watching. Thank you.